1 week season.
Hello, friends and Inner Circle fam. We are back for another first look video here on Tuesday, December 3rd, diving into the NFL Week 14 main slate. So we're going to kind of hop in here. So for me, like every week, my process starts by opening up the DK app, going game by game, position by position, kind of noting my initial thoughts. So we're going to kind of talk through what that looks like. And you can find my game by game thoughts pinned in the Inner Circle Discord, as well as on the OWS Twitter/X feed. So let's hop in here with the very first game, which is the Jets at the Dolphins. And so starting at the top here, so, Tua Tagovailoa, he's played pretty well since returning from concussion, like his fourth of his career. But no quarterback has thrown for 275 yards or 2 touchdowns against the Jets this season. So not a spot that I'm drawn to there. Jets have also been a tougher matchup to opposing running backs. However, Devon A. Chan, he has 5 or more receptions in over half his healthy games this season. And that goes along with, an average of 12 carries a game. So he's surpassed 20 DK points in 7 of his 11 healthy games this season. So I think he makes a strong floor play, but I think he's more of a floor play than a ceiling play this week at 8,200. On the other side of the ball, you've had 4 running backs eclipse 20 DK points against the Dolphins this season. James Cook went for 28. Zach Charbonnet went for 25. And then both Josh Jacobs and Ray Davis both went for 21. But no opposing running back has topped 92 yards against the Dolphins. Breece Hall does have 5 games this season with 19 or more DK points, but in each of them, he saw 6 targets and was heavily involved in the pass game for the Jets, which that's something that's only happened once in his past 6 games of seeing 6 or more targets. So probably not a spot I'm drawn to at his price this week. Through the air, the best matchup I think is probably Jonnu Smith. He's seen his price rise to 5,300, but he has 3 straight games of 22 or more DraftKings points, and he's eclipsed that 22 number in 4 out of his past 7 games since the Dolphins bye week. So to me, kind of tough matchups here almost across the board for both teams. Not really a game that stands out at any individual position outside of maybe Jonnu Smith or maybe some interest in Devon A. Chan. The next game on the slate is the Falcons at the Vikings. And so, to me, this is probably not going to stand out to most of the field, but this initially kind of strikes me as an intriguing game environment. So the Vikings have faced many strong offenses, but have only allowed Jahmyr Gibbs to exceed 100 yards rushing. And they faced Kyron Williams and Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, James Conner, Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, Jordan Mason. So they faced a slew of strong running backs and haven't allowed one to go for 100 yards rushing outside of Jahmyr Gibbs. So probably not a backfield I'm particularly drawn to. But while, opposing running backs have struggled, several opposing quarterbacks have done better than the matchup would suggest against the Vikings. You look at Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, they all threw for 300 or more yards. And, Matt Stafford and Jordan Love had 4 passing touchdowns against the Vikings. So while I think that the Vikings do present a hard on paper matchup, we have seen multiple quarterbacks kind of have strong games against them, 300-yard games or 4 passing touchdown games. So, you look at Kirk Cousins at 5,500. He has multiple 300, yard passing games this season. He's got multiple games of 4 passing touchdowns. So to me, he's, initially interesting. And, if the game sees that elevated passing volume from Cousins, I think it's really clear who the likeliest benefactor is going to be. in the 5 games this season, Cousins attempted more than 30 passes. Drake London is averaging 12.5 targets in those games. So to me, that's kind of the angle that I would take on this one. And then for the Vikings, the matchup is really interesting for Justin Jefferson. He's $7,800. It's the cheapest price he's been all year. And the Falcons have allowed an opposing primary pass catcher to exceed 14 DK points in every game this season. Cortland Sutton went 7 for 78 on 8 targets, so 14.8 DraftKings points. That was the worst of the bunch. That does exclude the Dallas game where Dak Prescott got injured mid-game and they were kind of scrambling. But, the other 12 games this season, wide receiver 1, kind of primary pass catcher, has had a strong game against the Falcons. So Justin Jefferson only has 1 touchdown since week 5, but he's still managed to surpass 20 DK points in half his games this year. So I think obviously still has that 30, 35, 40 point ceiling. We just haven't seen it yet this season, but he's still producing strong games. And I think this is a spot where we could see a 10 for 120 and a touchdown game from Jefferson. Next matchup here is the Saints at the Giants. And in his only start this season, Drew Lock attempted 32 passes. And at 4,700, I think that's an interesting option this week if he gets the nod to start for the Giants again. So 10 different starting quarterbacks have faced the Saints this season, and 7 of them attempted more than 30 passes. And with those, like, the worst passing yardage of that group came from Dak Prescott, who threw for 293 yards. So I think that if we see Drew Lock, we see elevated pass volumes of 30 or more. Statistically, history is showing that we could expect a strong outing from Drew Lock. To me, I think the ground games here are also interesting for both Alvin Kamara and Tyrone Tracy Jr. So for the Giants, the Saints have allowed 7 different running backs to surpass 20 DK points this season. But I think the matchup's even stronger for Alvin Kamara because the Giants have allowed 5 different running backs, Dowdle, Hubbard, Irving, Najee Harris, and Saquon Barkley, all to surpass 120 yards in just their last 6 games. So basically every opposing running back recently has had immense success. So with Taysom Hill put on IR on Monday, still without Rashid Shaheed, I'm going to expect Kamara to once again see 20 to 25 opportunities, which has been the case, 5 out of the last 6 weeks. And, I think that that's a spot to really focus on the running back position. On the other side of the ball, the Giants also put their tight end, Theo Johnson, on IR this week. So I think that potentially leads to even more targets being filtered to Malik Neighbors. He's already averaging a ridiculous 11.5 targets a game this season. And, at 6,900, I think that is, an interesting spot to go. And then I think at 4,300, Darius Slayton is also interesting as well. Drew Lock, a little bit of a gunslinger. Slayton's got that downfield game, and I think at 4,300 could easily, go for a long touchdown bomb here, give you, 15 to 20 points, and give you a 4 or 5x score. I certainly think that's well within the range of outcomes. The next game on the slate here is the Panthers at the Eagles. And this is a spot that really jumps off the page, just because the Panthers have allowed an opposing running back to score 20 or more DraftKings points on 9 different occasions this season. Now they're facing Saquon Barkley, who's averaging 24 opportunities a game and 26 DK points. So honestly, Saquon Barkley is probably the best on paper play of this slate. Potentially, a lock button play. I know it's, Tuesday, but just really strong on paper spot for Saquon. Through the air, I think the matchup's interesting for Grant Calcaterra. He's 3,500, especially if Devontae Smith is inactive again, as Dallas Goedert suffered an injury last week, likely to miss a few weeks. And the Panthers have allowed 10 different tight ends to put up at least 40 yards receiving against them this season through 12 games. So I think at 3,500, Calcaterra offers a good kind of pay down option at tight end on my kind of initial look here. If we transition over to the Panthers side of the ball, I think Adam Thielen probably my initial kind of favorite piece. Panthers likely to be facing a trailing grain script. And Thielen is just coming off I think a 10 or 11 target game with eight catches. So he'd probably be my favorite piece at 5,300. Next game on the slate is the Browns at the Steelers. So these teams, as you may remember, just met back in week 12. Was a 24-19 victory in the snow for the Browns. Russell Wilson coming into this game off the best game of his career. I think he threw for 412 yards. But the Browns have yet to allow a quarterback to pass for 300 yards this season. And that's despite facing Lamar and Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert. Like, they face some strong quarterbacks, haven't given up a massive game yet. And so they've kind of the Browns present a tough matchup for, opposing backs as well. No running back has rushed for more than 85 yards against them. And Devin Singletary's 108 total yards on 20 touches in week 3 is still the best kind of total yardage to date. And they faced Henry and Saquon Barkley and Dobbins and Kamara. So probably not a spot that I'm particularly drawn to as it relates to the backfields. To me, the most interesting piece to the Steelers offense is George Pickens. If we're looking to the other side of the ball, doesn't really stand out for Nick Chubb. I think Tyrone Tracy is the only running back to surpass 90 yards rushing against Pittsburgh. And again, they faced several strong backfields in, Henry and Dobbins, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall. So not really a spot that I'm really particularly drawn to there on either run games. Through the air for the Browns, Jameis Winston's attempted 40 or more pass attempts in every game he started this year outside of that snow game against the Steelers. And so this is likely to lead to some ample opportunities for the Cleveland pass catchers, specifically Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku. Cedric Tillman's missed the last 2 games with a concussion. So, I think that if he were to miss again, you'd see some elevated usage and then probably likely some ownership kind of flock to Jeudy and Njoku. Probably Jeudy specifically kind of coming off that career game on Monday Night Football. As it relates to Jameis, it's usually feast or famine. So, he's got games of 395 yards and then that game on Monday Night Football of 497 yards in 2 of his past 4 games. But he also has 2 games of 3 interceptions during that time span. So to me, I think Winston, could be interesting here as well. But I think the Steelers D is also intriguing, especially if Winston gains popularity due to that Monday Night Football performance. To go along with, those multiple games with 3 interceptions, he's also averaging 3 sacks a game in his 5 starts this season. So I think that puts the Steelers D, squarely in play this week. The next game on the slate is the Raiders at the Buccaneers. So to me, this sets up as an intriguing spot for second-year signal caller Adrian O'Connell. Coming off the best game of his young career with 340 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, and even Bryce Young all accounted for 300 or more total yards against Tampa this season. So I think Aiden O'Connell, aka AOC, he's priced at only 4,800. I think that he's intriguing. The Bucs have faced several strong tight ends this season and have given up some monster games. 27 fantasy points to Travis Kelce, 25 DraftKings points to Kyle Pitts, 20 DraftKings points to Mark Andrews. Then they also, just recently allowed a 7 for 62 game to Dallas Goedert, a 3 for 57 in 1 game to George Kittle on only 4 targets. So to me, Brock Bowers has seen 40 targets the past 3 weeks. He really stands out here, especially to pair with AOC. And then on the other side of the ball, we've seen Bucky Irving. We've seen his price skyrocket to 6,600, but he's also coming off the two best games of his young career with 18 and 28 touches. He had 27 or more DraftKings points in both of those games. And then, you've got facing the Raiders here, who have allowed, 20-point games to Devon A. Chan and Chase Brown, Najee Harris, Chuba Hubbard, J.K. Dobbins this year. So I think it's an intriguing spot for Bucky Irving here. And then the game also kind of stands out to me for Tampa Bay's tight end Cade Otton, who's averaging 8 targets a game since Chris Godwin's injury back in week 7. And the Vikings have already allowed some massive games to tight ends as well. A 10 for 90 and a touchdown to Kelsey, 5 for 100 and 2 touchdowns to Gesicki, 6 for 101 and 2 touchdowns to Jonnu Smith in just their last 5 games played. So I think this is an interesting spot for Cade Otton at 4,400. We've certainly seen some strong performances from him since Godwin went out. And I think Mike Evans being back kind of helps him take a little bit of the pass game attention away from him. The next game on the slate here is the Jaguars at the Titans. Just another game where a pay down quarterback kind of stands out as intriguing. So half the quarterbacks that have faced the Jags this season have either thrown for 330 or more yards or threw for 4 or more touchdowns. And that list includes some strong quarterbacks as well as kind of some weaker names with, Tua and CJ Stroud, Joe Flacco, Jared Goff, Josh Allen, and Caleb Williams. So I think this is an interesting spot here for Will Levis. He's got games of 200. I think he's got 2 games of 275 or more yards in 2 out of his past 3 games. So he's starting to find his footing here, and I think he's intriguing. And then since the DeAndre Hopkins trade, Calvin Ridley's averaging 8.5 targets a game. He's actually, a little bit of a revenge spot here facing his old team. And, the Jags have allowed 7 wide receivers to exceed 100 receiving yards this year. So I think it's an interesting spot for Ridley. And I also think it's interesting for Tony Pollard. Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, and the combination of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs all exceeded 100 yards against the Jags in just the past 5 games, with 3 of them accounting for multiple touchdowns. So, the Titans have been featuring Tony Pollard a lot. It hasn't really been that even split, even when Tajay Spears is in. So I think this is an interesting spot for Tony Pollard. I don't expect him to garner much ownership at all. On the other side of the ball, it looks like Mac Jones is likely to be under center for the Jags. So kind of tempering any interest I'm going to have in Jags pieces. Although, Brian Thomas Jr. probably my preferred option if you're going to roster a Jag either as part of a bring back or just a one-off. But I think most of my interest in this game is on the Titans side of the ball. Moving on to the next game on the slate, it's the Seahawks at the Cardinals. So Kyler Murray, he's played well so far this season. He's led the Cardinals to the division lead currently. But Seattle hasn't allowed a quarterback to post a 25-point fantasy score yet this season. So not a spot that jumps off the page for me for Murray. And, the Cards are also a middling matchup for Geno Smith. So while he's among the league leaders in pass attempts, he only has 1 game above 18 fantasy points since week 6. So not a spot that really stands out for me for either quarterback. Ground matchup doesn't really stand out, honestly, either. The only backfield to score a touchdown or even amassed 100 yards since week 5 against Arizona was the Dolphins. Whatever that is now, 8-9 game sample size, not a ton of success against them recently. So at 6,800, it just kind of feels like there's better spots on this slate to attack than Kenneth Walker on the road. On the other side of the ball, Seattle has limited, like 2 weeks ago when they played in Week 12, Seattle limited the combination of Trey Benson and James Conner to just 67 total yards on 16 or 17 touches. So probably not a spot I'm drawn to there either. However, I do think the matchup is intriguing for Trey Benson, who's seen 27 targets the past 2 weeks. And the Seahawks have given up some really strong games to tight ends this season, including 20 plus DK point outings to Hunter Henry and George Kittle and Trey McBride just 2 weeks ago. So I think McBride is interesting here. And then on the other side of the ball, matchups kind of middling for both DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith-Njigba. No pass catcher, so wide receiver or tight end, has gone for 20 DK points against Arizona since Week 5. So again, the last 8 or 9 weeks, the defense has really been strong. And, that includes games against Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill and Garrett Wilson and the same Seattle offense of both Metcalf and JSN, just 2 weeks ago. So I think my initial thoughts kind of have this game as one that I'll probably mostly avoid outside of some Trey McBride exposure. But again, it's early in the week. My thoughts may change or evolve as the week progresses. But early on, not one that I'm really catching my eye as spots that stand out. So the next game on the slate here is the Bills at the Rams. Probably an above average matchup for Josh Allen. The Rams haven't allowed any 30-point scorers to the position, despite facing some decent quarterbacks in Hurts and Tua, Geno, Jordan Love, Purdy, and Kyler Murray already this season. So above average matchup, but not one that really stands out or jumps out for Josh Allen. And at 8K, it just kind of feels like there's potentially some better spots for Allen. He's only top 25 points once since Week 3. But I do think, I think if you were going that way, Khalil Shakir or Amari Cooper both are interesting as, the Rams have allowed some monster games to opposing wide receivers, including, 7 for 180 and 2 touchdowns to JSN, 11 for 175 and 3 for Jawan Jennings, 4 for 130 and 2 touchdowns to Marvin Harrison. And then they also let Jamison Williams, AJ Brown, and Justin Jefferson all go for, 100 plus yards and a touchdown. So there's certainly some upside there for Bills wide receivers. Through the air, the matchup I think is really less appealing for Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, as the New York Jets are the only team to have a pass catcher, again, wide receiver or tight end. It clips more than, I think, 82 yards against the Bills. So not a particularly strong matchup for opposing wide receivers. And, Nacua and Kupp are both in the 7K range again this week. So I just think they're probably better options if you're paying up at wide receiver. And then the final game here of the slate is the Bears at the 49ers. So Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason both out for San Francisco, leaving Isaac Orendo in line to lead the Niners backfield. So in the 2 games where he saw more than 5 total touches this season, Orendo produced games of 99 yards on 10 touches and 102 yards and a touchdown on 17 touches. So, the 49ers have produced strong running back scores almost every week of the season, no matter who it is. And the past 5 weeks, the Bears have surrendered 119 yards to James Conner, 129 yards to Aaron Jones, 134 yards to Josh Jacobs, 77 to Ramondre Stevenson, and then 228 yards to the combo of Montgomery and Gibbs. So I think at 5,400, Orendo honestly feels like a lock button play this early in the week. Like, I'm going to be shocked if he's not 50% owned or higher by the field. On the other side of the ball for the Bears, Caleb Williams looked better as of late. I think he's interesting at 5,600. The mobile quarterbacks that have faced the Niners have all produced some decent games, passing as well as on the ground. Kyler Murray went 7 for 83 and a touchdown on the ground. Mahomes 7 for 39 and a touchdown on the ground. And then Allen went 3 for 18 and 2 touchdowns on the, one being a receiving touchdown. But none of his three pass catchers really stand out. I think all are certainly in play, but none kind of jump off the page from a matchup perspective. And that kind of gets us through the 10 games. First pass here on the defenses that kind of stand out to me. I would say the Eagles, the Steelers, the Vikings, and then kind of mid to lower price, the Cardinals and the Tennessee Titans. So thank you for tuning in this week. And I hope to see you and your OWS avatar at the top of a leaderboard come the end of week 14. Thanks for tuning in.